latitude and longitude of the land, both sub would be a coordinate below that. I like the story Jack and the Beanstalk, where if it was a forte, wherever a guy went around, he saw bad roots that led into gigantic worlds of dystrophy. All around us, there's always chaos, which would ensue mostly when you see things that are fluid-like interacting with solid-state structural intertwined together. These were in sorts subjected as low-level statues. The same can be said for molecular structure. It's an archetype, but isn't its actual figuration. Are there bumps and nicks in the molecules that aren't represented unless you look at them with a bare eye? It's just as dangerous as a psycho and a kamikaze being the same thing with multiple personalities. You know, the planets are great, and then the ring on Saturn is fantastic, but that's really just an archetype to describe an area between that isn't material and yet considered part of the planet. The area between the ring and the planet. This is to be not confused, but to be able to deduce and derive the understanding that energy is not your consciousness, and in separating your energy from your body is something that's able to be done unconsciously, subliminally. And that's when you're identifying and leaving everything else that isn't what you identify with as not important. That's why when someone says you need to be mindful of your surroundings, this is what it looks like in a world of hurt if you aren't. Now, if you're not following that, it's probably because you don't know topology, and that's okay. Not a lot of people do. The orifice of it would be a mug transforming to a torus. And this is all possible, and it has to be, because nothing is stable, not even the rings in Saturn. And so when this is on a more finer scale, everything in the universe is fine-tuned. And when you have like a molecular structure, it's not going to be perfect. The imperfections on it are actually what going to attribute to a molecular model being the ones that we do look at, as it's not as perfect, but then the imperfections in that such is as when you're going 6 feet deep within the radius of the entire planet, that's a grace period, and it's going to be allowing for capitalizing, banking off the miss. So just as though when you're going about this radius 6 feet about a planet, the expectance rates is the same as the potentials. And so when this is an occurrence, you're going to see goofy things like snow falling everywhere. You know, the iconic image of a rain cloud over one person. This is just as the same as all these chaotic experiences happening, you know, with the wind blowing behind a car, kicking up stuff. It is the same as a rain cloud over someone's head, following them. And these are all in lieu of the chaotic dystrophy that happens naturally, but it's more so would be happening ongoing, and more so like more than just over one person, but around their entire environment, outwards more and more. This is the more and more imperfections are made perfect about the molecular structures, but they're more perfect is just as they're synthetic models And this would be, of course, how the grace period between the planet and the ring on Saturn is more and more defined as a net zero between the two. That is it all encompassing of the nature of the story of the Jack and the Beanstalk. If it was like a bad beanstalk, wherever he went, he would see these giant roots, and that's what they would be evolved as. He's noticing them, and that's what they encumber. You know, the planets are great, and then the ring on Saturn is fantastic, but that's really just an archetype to describe an area between that isn't material and yet considered part of the planet. The area between the ring and the planet. This is to be not confused, but to be able to deduce and derive the understanding that energy is not your consciousness, and in separating your energy from your body is something that's able to be done unconsciously, subliminally. And that's when you're identifying and leaving everything else that isn't what you identify with as not important. That's why when someone says you need to be mindful of your surroundings, this is what it looks like in a world of hurt if you aren't. And so the fine-tuned structure of the universe is, of course, how the cosmological constant isn't at zero, and then the cosmological constant isn't at zero energy, is so that things aren't synthetic everywhere. And so when things are realistic, it's a double catch-22, because you can't look at a molecular structure with your bare eyes and see its imperfections. But its imperfections would only be scalable if you could look at it without a device. Otherwise, you just go off these models that have overdrawn the imperfections so that they're not even able to be seen. So the only way you would be able to deduct them is through these things that are just like twinkles in water when the sun's blazing over them. So in computing versus stuff that isn't can make a whole world of difference if just you have the administrator's key. And so if you get something that's a freebie because you've got enough points, and then you want a refill off of that, it wouldn't count for a refill off of that. This is no different than how Saturn has a ring, and that ring is not attached to the planet. Well, then it can be deducted as like ground zero between the ring and the planet, where that can account for stuff about the surface that wouldn't seem as normal as when you get a ground zero in the mix. Something like a 6-foot radius within all about the surface of the planet, going down 6 feet, a radius all about that, is equal to if it was enveloped outwards and about the planet on top, all about its atmosphere. Even though its atmosphere isn't scaled perfectly, neither is the surface. So this area between the ring and the planet would account for both of those, and the planet could be made flat from the viewing vantage if you were under the ground zero within the radius of its interior.